Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to read the second chapter of the Player's Handbook for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. Chapter 2 is on character races. So let's begin. Chapter 2, Player Character Races. After creating your character's ability scores, you must select a player character race. This is not a race in the true sense of the word, Caucasian, Black, Asian, etc. It is actually a fantasy species for your character: human, elf, dwarf, gnome, half-elf, or halfling. Each race is different. Each possesses special powers and has different lists of classes to choose from. All 6 of the standard races are described in detail in this chapter. In many cases, broad statements are made concerning the race in general. Players are not bound by these generalities. For example, the statement that dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn does not mean that your character cannot be a jolly dwarf. It means that the garden variety dwarf is dour and taciturn. If player characters were just like everyone else, they wouldn't be adventurers. Make your character unique and he will be more fun to play. Minimum and maximum ability scores. All non-human PC races, also called demi-human races, or demi-human, have minimum and maximum requirements for their ability scores. If you want to have a demi-human character, the character's ability scores must be within the allowable range. The minimum and maximums for each race are listed on table 7. The minimums are listed before the slash, the maximums are listed after the slash. Your character's sex has no effect on these minimums or maximums. Consult table 7 before making any racial adjustments to your character's ability scores. If the basic scores that you rolled up meet the requirements for a particular race, your character can be of that race, even if later modifications change the ability scores so they exceed the maximum or don't meet the minimums. Once you satisfy the requirements at the start, you never have to worry about them again. Table 7 gives the minimum and maximum scores a newly created character must have to be a member of a demi-human race. Any character can be a human, if the player so desires. So looking at table 7, the racial ability requirements. The abilities are listed: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And across the top you have each race: dwarf, elf, gnome, half-elf, and halfling. So to be a dwarf, you have to have a strength between 8 and 18 inclusive, and a dexterity between 3 and 17, a constitution between 11 and 18, an intelligence and wisdom between 3 and 18, and a charisma ability score of 3 to 17. To be an elf, you must have a strength between 3 and 18, dexterity between 6 and 18, a constitution score between 7 and 18, an intelligence score between 8 and 18, wisdom score between 3 and 18, and a charisma score between 8 and 18. To be a gnome, you must have a strength score between 6 and 18, a dexterity score between 3 and 18, a constitution between 8 and 18, an intelligence score between 6 and 18, a wisdom score between 3 and 18, and a charisma score between 3 and 18. To be a half-elf, you must have a strength between 3 and 18, a dexterity between 6 and 18, a constitution between 6 and 18, an intelligence score between 4 and 18, a wisdom score between 3 and 18, and a charisma score between 3 and 18. To be a halfling, you must have a strength between 7 and 18, and there's a note here that halfling fighters do not roll for exceptional strength, so if you do roll an 18 and want to be a halfling fighter, you don't get to roll the percentile dice for exceptional strength. And halfling needs a dexterity score of 7 to 18, constitution between 10 and 18, intelligence between 6 and 18, a wisdom score between 3 and 17, and a charisma score between 3 and 18. So you have to roll between those ability scores to be any one of those races. Any scores will allow you to be a human character. Racial ability adjustments. If you chose to make your character a dwarf, elf, gnome, or halfling, you now have to adjust some of your character's ability scores. The adjustments are mandatory. All characters of these races receive the adjustments. Even if adjustments raise or lower your character's ability scores beyond the minimums and maximums shown on table 7. You do not have to pick a new race. The adjustments can also raise a score to a 19 or lower it to a 2. Table 8, racial ability adjustments. So for a dwarf, the adjustments would be a +1 to Constitution, a -1 to Charisma. If you choose to be an elf, you get a +1 to Dexterity and a -1 to Constitution. If you choose to be a gnome, you get a +1 to Intelligence and a -1 to Wisdom. If you are a halfling, you get a +1 to Dexterity and a -1 to Strength. Class restrictions and level limits. The human race has one special ability in the AD&D game. Humans can choose to be of any class, warrior, wizard, priest, or rogue, and can rise to great level in any class. The other races have fewer choices of the character classes and usually are limited in the level they can attain. These restrictions reflect the natural tendencies of the races. Dwarves like war and fighting and dislike magic, etc. The limits are high enough so a demi-human can achieve power and importance in at least one class. A halfling, for example, can become the best thief in the land, but he cannot become a great fighter. The limits also exist for play balance. The ability of humans to assume any role and reach any level is their only advantage. The demi-human races have other powers that make them entertaining to play, particularly the ability to be multi-classed, see the glossary. These powers balance the enjoyment of play against the ability to rise in level. Ask your DM for the level limits imposed on non-human characters. Languages. Racial languages for demi-humans can be handled in either of two ways, depending on whether or not your DM uses the optional proficiency system. Either way, your character automatically knows his native language. Without the proficiency system, your character starts adventuring already knowing a number of additional languages. The number depends on his intelligence score. See Table 4. The additional languages must be chosen from among those listed in his race's description. If you use the proficiency system, your character receives additional languages by using proficiency slots. See page 51 to determine how many languages he knows when he starts adventuring. His native language does not cost a slot. Demi-humans must choose their languages from among those listed in the following racial descriptions. Human PCs generally start the game knowing only their regional language, the language they grew up speaking. The DM may decide to allow beginning PCs additional languages up to their intelligence score limit or proficiency slot limit, if he feels the PCs had the opportunity to learn these as they grew up. Otherwise, human PCs may learn additional languages as they adventure. Let's take a look at page 51 to see those proficiency bonuses. Is this page 51? I believe you get to use your non-weapon proficiency slots, but yeah, there we go. So it's on page 54. So it's not on page 51 in this version of the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is on page 54, and looking in the non-weapon proficiency groups table 37, modern languages, you get one additional slot, or you have to use one slot per language. So we'll take a further look at languages and weapon proficiencies when we get to the non-weapon proficiency section of the rules. For now, let's focus on and continue with the character races. Dwarves. Dwarves are short, stocky fellows, easily identified by their size and shape. They average 4 to 4.5 feet tall. They have ruddy cheeks, dark eyes, and dark hair. Dwarves generally live for 350 years. Dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn. They are given to hard work and care little for most humor. They are strong and brave. They enjoy beer, ale, mead, and even stronger drink. Their chief love, however, is precious metal, particularly gold. They prize gems, of course, especially diamonds and opaque gems, except pearls, which they do not like. Dwarves like the earth and dislike the sea. Not overly fond of elves, they have a fierce hatred of orcs and goblins. Their short, stocky builds make them ill-suited for riding horses or other large mounts, although ponies present no difficulty. So they tend to be a trifle dubious and wary of these creatures. They are ill-disposed toward magic and have little talent for it, but revel in fighting, warcraft, and scientific arts, such as engineering. Though dwarves are suspicious and avaricious, their courage and tenacity more than compensate for these shortcomings. Dwarves typically dwell in hilly or mountainous regions. They prefer life in the comforting gloom and solidness that is found underground. They have several special abilities that relate to their underground life, and they are noted for being particularly resistant to magics and poisons. A character of the dwarven race can be a cleric, a fighter, or a thief. He can also choose to be a fighter cleric or a fighter thief. From living underground, dwarves have found it useful to learn the languages of several of their neighbors, both friendly and hostile. The initial languages a dwarf can learn are common, dwarf, gnome, goblin, kobold, orc, and any others your DM allows. The actual number of languages is limited by the intelligence of the player character. See Table 4, or by the proficiency slots he allots to languages if that optional system is used. By nature, dwarves are non-magical and never use magical spells. Clerical spells are allowed, however. This gives a bonus to dwarves' saving throws against attacks from magical wands, staves, rods, and spells. This bonus is a +1 for every 3.5 points of Constitution score. Thus, for example, if a dwarf has a Constitution score of 7, he gains +2 on saving throws. These bonuses are summarized on Table 9. Table 9, Constitution saving throw bonuses. Constitution score, and then the saving throw bonus. So with a Constitution score of 4 to 6, you'd get a saving throw bonus on against attacks for magical wands, staves, rods, and spells of +1. So Constitution score 4 to 6 is a saving throw bonus against those items of a +1. Constitution score 7 to 10 is a saving throw bonus +2. Constitution score 11 to 13 is a saving throw bonus of +3. Constitution score 14 to 17 is a saving throw bonus of +4. And a Constitution of 18 to 19 is a bonus of +5. Similarly, dwarves have exceptional resistance to toxic substances. All dwarven characters make saving throws against poisons with the same bonus that they get against magical attacks. See again in Table 9. Also, because of their non-magical nature, however, dwarves have trouble using magical items. All magical items that are not specifically suited to this character's class have a 20% chance to malfunction when used by a dwarf. This check is made each time a dwarf uses a magical item. A malfunction affects only the current use. The item may work properly the next time. For devices that are continually in operation, the check is made the first time the device is used during an encounter. If the check is passed, the device functions normally until it is turned off. Thus, a dwarf would have to check upon donning a robe of blending, but would not check again until he has taken the robe off and then put it on again. If a cursed item malfunctions, the character recognizes its cursed nature and can dispose of the item. Malfunction applies to rods, staves, wands, rings, amulets, potions, horns, jewels, and all other magical items except weapons, shields, armor, gauntlets, and girdles. This penalty does not apply to dwarven clerics using clerical items. In melee, dwarves add 1 to their dice rolls to hit orcs, half-orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins. When ogres, trolls, ogre magi, giants, or titans attack dwarves, these monsters must subtract 4 from their attack rolls because of the dwarves' small size and combat ability against these much bigger creatures. Dwarven infravision enables them to see up to 60 feet in the dark. Dwarves are miners of great skill. While underground, they can detect the following information when within 10 feet of the particular phenomenon, but they can determine their approximate depth below the surface at any time. So dwarves can detect grade or slope in a passage on a roll of 1 to 5 on a d6. They can detect new tunnel or new passage construction on a roll of 1 to 5 on a d6. They can detect sliding or shifting walls or rooms on a d6 of a roll 1 to 4. They can detect stonework, traps, pits, and deadfalls on a 1 to 3 on a d6, so 50% of the time. They can determine approximate depth underground on a roll of 1 to 3 on a d6, so again, 50% of the time. Note that the dwarf must deliberately try to make these determinations. The information does not simply spring to mind unbidden. Because of their sturdy builds, dwarves add 1 to their initial constitution scores. Their dour and suspicious natures cause them to subtract 1 from their initial charisma scores. So again, you can see that just from a glance of looking at tables, you're not going to get all the information for a given race. You have to read the content in the handbook to get the languages, saving throw bonuses, that penalty of dwarfs not being able to use magic and having to roll to use magical items. Also, their melee bonus against half-orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, etc., and the penalty against the larger monsters when they fight dwarves. So you do have to read. It was AD&D rules were heavy on the reading, so that you got all the information the way it was presented in the books. Elves. Elves tend to be somewhat shorter and slimmer than normal humans. Their features are finely chiseled and delicate, and they speak in melodic tones. Although they appear fragile and weak, as a race they are quick and strong. Elves often live to be over 1,200 years old, although long before this time they feel compelled to depart the realms of men and mortals. Where they go is uncertain, but it is an undeniable urge of their race. Elves are often considered frivolous and aloof. In fact, they are not, although humans often find their personalities impossible to fathom. They concern themselves with natural beauty, dancing and frolicking, playing and singing, unless necessity dictates otherwise. They are not fond of ships or mines, but enjoy growing things and gazing at the open sky. Even though elves tend toward haughtiness and arrogance at times, they regard their friends and associates as equals. They do not make friends easily, but a friend or enemy is never forgotten. They prefer to distance themselves from humans, have little love for dwarves, and hate the evil denizens of the woods. Their humor is clever, as are their songs and poetry. Elves are brave, but never foolhardy. They eat sparingly, they drink meat and wine, but seldom to excess. While they find well-wrought jewelry a pleasure to behold, they are not overly interested in money or gain. They find magic and swordplay, or any refined combat art, fascinating. If they have a weakness, it lies in these interests. There are 5 branches of the elven race: aquatic, gray, high, wood, and dark. Elf player characters are always assumed to be of the most common type, high elves, although a character can be another type of elf with the DM's permission, but the choice grants no additional powers. To the eye of outsiders, the differences between the groups are mostly cosmetic, but most elves maintain that there are important cultural differences between the various groups. Aquatic elves spend their lives beneath the waves and have adapted to these conditions. Gray elves are considered the most noble and serious-minded of this breed. High elves are the most common. Wood elves are considered to be wild, temperamental, and savage. All others hold that the subterranean dark elves are corrupt and evil, no longer part of the elven community. A player character elf can be a cleric, fighter, mage, thief, or ranger. In addition, an elf can choose to be a multi-class fighter mage, fighter thief, fighter mage thief, or mage thief. The rules governing these combinations are explained under multi-class characters on page 44. Elves have found it useful to learn the languages of several of the forest's children, both the good and the bad. As initial languages, an elf can choose common, elf, gnome, halfling, goblin, hobgoblin, orc, and gnoll. The number of languages an elf can learn is limited by his intelligence, see table 4, or the proficiency slots he allots to languages, if that optional system is used. Elven characters have 90% resistance to sleep and all charm-related spells. See Chapter 9, Combat, for an explanation of magic resistance. This is in addition to the normal saving throw allowed against charm spell. When employing a bow of any other sort than a crossbow, or when using a short or long sword, elves gain a bonus of +1 to their attack rolls. An elf can gain a bonus to surprise opponents, but only if the elf is not in metal armor. Even then, the elf must either be alone or with a party comprised only of elves or halflings, also not in metal armor, or 90 feet or more away from his party, the group of characters he is with, to gain this bonus. If he fulfills these conditions, he moves so silently that opponents suffer a -4 penalty to their surprise die rolls. If the elf must open a door or screen to attack, this penalty is reduced to -2. Elven infravision enables them to see up to 60 feet in darkness. Secret doors, those constructed so as to be hard to notice, and concealed doors, those hidden from sight by screens, curtains, or the like, are difficult to hide from elves. Merely passing within 10 feet of a concealed door gives an elven character a 1 in 6 chance roll a 1 on a d6 to notice it. If actively searching for such doors, elven characters have a 1 in 3 chance, roll a 1 or 2 on a d6, to find a secret door, and a 1 in 2 chance, roll a 1, 2, or 3 on a d6 to discover a concealed portal. As stated previously, elven characters add a 1 to their initial dexterity score. Likewise, as elves are not as sturdy as humans, they deduct 1 from their initial constitution scores. Gnomes. Kin to dwarves, gnomes are noticeably smaller than their distant cousins. Gnomes, as they proudly maintain, are also less rotund than dwarves. Their noses, however, are significantly larger. Most gnomes have dark tan or brown skin and white hair. A typical gnome lives for 350 years. Gnomes have lively and sly senses of humor, especially for practical jokes. They have a great love of living things and finely wrought items, particularly gems and jewelry. Gnomes love all sorts of precious stones and are masters of gem polishing and cutting. Gnomes prefer to live in areas of rolling rocky hills, well wooded and uninhabited by humans. Their diminutive stature has made them suspicious of the larger races, humans and elves, although they are not hostile. They are sly and furtive with those they do not know or trust, and somewhat reserved even under the best of circumstances. Dwelling in mines and burrows, they are sympathetic to dwarves, but find their cousins' aversion to surface dwellers foolish. A gnome character can elect to be a fighter, a thief, a cleric, or an illusionist. A gnome can have 2 classes, but not 3. So fighter thief, illusionist thief, fighter cleric, fighter illusionist, etc. Due to his upbringing, a beginning gnome character can choose to know the following languages, in addition to any other allowed by the DM: Common, Dwarf, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Kobold, and the simple common speech of burrowing mammals, such as moles, badgers, weasels, shrews, ground squirrels, etc. The actual number of languages a character begins with depends upon his intelligence score, see Table 4, or the proficiency slots he allots to languages, if that optional system is used. Like their cousins the dwarves, gnomes are highly magic resistant. A gnome player character gains a bonus of +1 for every 3.5 points of constitution score, just as dwarves do, see Table 9. This bonus applies to saving throws against magical wands, staves, rods, and spells. Gnomes also suffer a 20% chance of failure every time they use any magical item except weapons, armor, shields, illusionist items, and, if the character is a thief, items that duplicate thieving abilities. This check is made each time the gnome attempts to use the device, or, in the case of continuous use devices, each time the device is activated. Like dwarves, gnomes can sense a cursed item if the device fails to function. In melee, gnome characters add 1 to their attack rolls to hit kobolds or goblins. When gnolls, bugbears, ogres, trolls, ogre magi, giants, or titans attack gnomes, these monsters must subtract 4 from their attack rolls, because of the gnome's small size and their combat skills against these much larger creatures. Gnomes' infravision enables them to see up to 60 feet in the dark. Being tunnelers of exceptional merit, gnomes are able to detect the following within 10 feet. Exception: they can determine their approximate depth or direction underground at any time. They must stop and concentrate for 1 round to use any of these abilities. Detect grade or slope in a passage, roll 1 to 5 on a d6. Detect unsafe walls, ceiling, or floors, roll 1 to 7 on a d10. Determine approximate depth underground, roll 1 to 4 on d6. Determine approximate direction underground, roll 1 to 3 on a d6. Gnome characters gain a +1 bonus to their intelligence scores to reflect their highly inquisitive natures. They suffer a -1 penalty to wisdom because their curiosity often leads them unknowingly into danger. Half-Elves. Half-Elves are the most common mixed race beings. The relationship between elf, human, and half-elf is defined as follows. 1. Anyone with both elven and human ancestors is either a human or a half-elf. Elves have only elven ancestors. 2. If there are more human ancestors than elven, the person is human. If there are equal number or more elves, the person is half-elven. Half-elves are usually much like their elven parent in appearance. They are handsome folk. with the good features of each of their races. They mingle freely with either race, being only slightly taller than the average elf, 5 feet 6 inches on average, and weighing about 150 pounds. They typically live about 160 years. They do not have all the abilities of the elf, nor do they have all the flexibility of unlimited level advancement of the human. Finally, in some of the less civilized nations, half-elves are viewed with suspicion and superstition. In general, a half-elf has the curiosity, inventiveness, and ambition of his human ancestors, and the refined senses, love of nature, and artistic tastes of his elven ancestors. Half-elves do not form communities among themselves. Rather, they can be found living in both elven and human communities. The reactions of humans and elves to half-elves ranges from intrigued fascination to outright bigotry. Of all the demi-human races, half-elves have the greatest range of choices in character class. They tend to make good druids and rangers. A half-elf can choose to be a cleric, druid, fighter, ranger, mage, specialist wizard, thief, or bard. In addition, a half-elf can choose from the following multi-class combinations: cleric or druid and fighter, cleric or druid and fighter and mage, cleric or druid and ranger, cleric or druid and mage, fighter mage, fighter thief, fighter mage thief, and mage thief. The half-elf must abide by the rules for multi-class characters. Half-elves do not have a language of their own. Their extensive contact with other races enables them to choose any of the following languages, plus any other allowed by the DM: Common, Elf, Gnome, Halfling, Goblin, Hobgoblin, Orc, and Gnoll. The actual number of languages the character knows is limited by his intelligence, see Table 4, or by the number of proficiency slots he allots to languages, if that optional system is used. Half-elven characters have a 30% resistance to sleep and all charm-related spells. Half-elven infravision enables them to see up to 60 feet in darkness. Secret or concealed doors are difficult to hide from half-elves, just as they are from elves. Merely passing within 10 feet of a concealed door, one hidden by obstructing curtains, etc., gives the half-elven character a 1 in 6 chance, roll a 1 on a d6, of spotting it. If the character is actively seeking to discover hidden doors, he has a 1 in 3 chance, roll a 1 or 2 on a d6, of spotting a secret door, one constructed to be undetectable, and a 1 in 2 chance, roll a 1, 2, or 3 on a d6, of locating a concealed door. Halflings. Halflings are short, generally plump people, very much like small humans. Their faces are round and broad, and often quite florid. Their hair is typically curly, and the tops of their feet are covered with coarse hair. They prefer not to wear shoes whenever possible. Their typical life expectancy is approximately 150 years. Halflings are sturdy and industrious, generally quiet and peaceful. Overall, they prefer the comforts of home to dangerous adventuring. They employ good living, rough humor, and homespun stories. In fact, they can be a trifle boring at times. Halflings are not forward, but they are observant and conversational if in friendly company. Halflings see wealth only as a means for gaining creature comforts, which they love. Though they are not overly brave or ambitious, they are generally honest and hardworking when there is need. Halfling homes are well-furnished burrows, although most of their work is done on the surface. Elves generally like them in a patronizing sort of way. Dwarves cheerfully tolerate them, thinking halflings somewhat soft and harmless. Gnomes, although they drink more and eat less, like halflings best, feeling them kindred spirits. Because halflings are more open and outgoing than any of the other three, they get along with other races far better. There are 3 types of halflings: harefeets, tallfellows, and stouts. Harefeets are the most common type, but for player characters, any of the 3 is acceptable. A halfling character can choose to be a cleric, fighter, thief, or multi-class fighter thief. The halfling must use the rules provided for multi-class characters. Through their contact with other races, halfling characters are allowed to choose initial languages from common, halfling, dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, and orc, in addition to any other languages the DM allows. The actual number of languages the character knows is limited by his intelligence, see Table 4, or by the number of proficiency slots he allots to languages, if the optional system is used. All halfling characters have a high resistance to magical spells, so for every 3.5 points of Constitution score, the character gains a +1 bonus on saving throws for wands, staves, rods, and spells. These bonuses are summarized on Table 9. Halflings have a similar resistance to poisons of all sorts, so they gain a Constitution bonus identical to that for saving throws versus magical attacks when they make saving throws versus poison, i.e. +1 to +5 depending on the Constitution score above. Halflings have a natural talent with slings and thrown weapons. Rock pitching is a favorite sport of many a halfling child. All halflings gain a +1 bonus to their attack rolls when using thrown weapons and slings. A halfling can gain a bonus to surprise opponents, but only if the halfling is not in metal armor. Even then, the halfling must either be alone or with a party comprised only of halflings or elves, or 90 feet or more away from his party to gain this bonus. If he fulfills any of these conditions, he causes a -4 penalty to opponents' surprise rolls. If a door or other screen must be opened, this penalty is reduced by -2. Depending on their lineage, certain halfling characters have infravision. Any halfling character has a 15% chance to have normal infravision. This means he is pure stout, out to 60 feet. Failing that chance, there's a 25% chance that he has limited infravision, mixed stout tall fellow, or stout hairfeets lineage, effective out to 30 feet. Similarly, halflings with any stoutish blood can note if a passage is an up or down grade with 75% accuracy. Roll a 1, 2, 3 on a d4. They can determine direction half the time. Roll a 1, 2, or 3 on a d6. These abilities function only when the character is concentrating on the desired information to the exclusion of all else, and only if the character is pure or partially stout. Halfling characters have a penalty of -1 to their initially generated strength scores, and they gain a bonus of +1 to dexterity. Humans. Although humans are treated as a single race in the AD&D game, they come in all the varieties we know on Earth. A human PC can have whatever racial characteristics the DM allows. Humans have only one special ability. They can be of any character class and rise to any level in any class. Other PC races have limited choices in these areas. Humans are also more social and tolerant than most other races, accepting the company of elves, dwarves, and the like with noticeably less complaint. Because of these abilities and tendencies, humans have become significant powers within the world and often rule empires that other races, because of their racial tendencies, would find difficult to manage. Other characteristics. After you have selected a race, you may want to fill in the details of your character. You are not required to do so, but there are many situations in which this information is vital or useful to role-playing. The sex and name of your character are up to you. Your character can be of the same sex as you or the opposite sex. Some people feel it is important to know whether their character is right or left-handed. Actually, this has no bearing on the play of the game, since all characters are assumed to be reasonably competent with either hand. That doesn't mean everyone is trained to fight with two weapons. It is easiest to say that your character has the same handedness as you. This will result in the normal ratio of right to left-handed people. On occasion, it may be useful to know your character's height and weight. The best way to determine height and weight is to choose the appropriate numbers subject to your DM's approval. If you want a short, pudgy human fighter, you can select an appropriate height and weight. Otherwise, heights and weights can be generated randomly using Table 10 on the next page. Take the appropriate base score and add the die roll modifier. As with all tables, this can create some ridiculous results, one of the problems with randomness, and at the same time cannot account for the full variety of mankind or demi-humankind. The table only reproduces a fairly average range for each race. Heights and weights for demi-human races not listed on the table must be decided by your DM. So average height and weight, you have your races, your base height in inches, your modifier, your base weight in pounds, and then your modifier. So for a dwarf, your base would be 43 inches for a male, 41 inches for a female, and you'd modify that with a 1d10, or a roll on a 1d10. The weight would be 130 pounds for a male, and then 105 pounds for a female dwarf. That would be the base, and you would modify that with the addition of a roll on a 4d10. So you'd roll 4d10s and add that to your base weight. For an elf, the height would be, base height would be 55 inches for a male, 50 inches for a female. You'd roll a 1d10 and add that result to the base, and that would be your height in inches. For weight, you'd start at 90 pounds for a male elf, 70 pounds for a female elf, and you would add a roll of 3d10 to that base. A gnome male would start off at 38 inches, female would be 36 inches, with a roll on a d6 added to that base in inches. The gnome male would start at 72 pounds, female would start at 68 pounds, and you would roll 5d4 and add it to your base weight. A half-elf would start at 60 inches for a male, 58 inches for a female height, and add a roll of 2d6. A male would start with a weight of 110, and a female half-elf would start at a weight of 85 pounds, and you would add 3d12 to that base. A halfling male would start at 32 inches tall, female would start at 30 inches, and you would add a 2d8 to that base height. A halfling male would start with a weight of 52 pounds, a female would start with a weight of 48 pounds, and you would add a 5d4 roll to that base weight. A human male would start at 60 inches, a female would start at 59 inches, you would add a 2d10 roll to that, and then a male human would start at 140 pounds, and a female would start at 100 pounds, you would roll 6d10 and add that result to your base weight. It says here, females tend to be lighter and shorter than males, thus the base numbers for height and weight are divided into male-female values. Note that the modifier still allows for a broad range in each category. The tallest man on record stood 8 feet 11.1 inches, while the tallest woman was 8 feet 1.25 inches. The shortest man was only 26.5 inches tall, and the shortest woman bettered this at only 24 inches in height. While the lightest humans are also among the shortest, the heaviest man weighed an estimated 1,400 pounds and stood only 6 feet 1 inch. The heaviest woman is thought to have weighed 880 pounds. Obviously, these figures indicate that there is a great deal of variety possible for player characters. Players may also want to know their characters' starting ages. Human characters can start at any age that is agreeable to both the player and the DM. However, all beginning adventurers are assumed to be at least 16 years old, since they must grow physically, emotionally, and in particular experience before they are ready to undertake the rigors of an adventuring life. Table 11 can be used to give a starting age. Add the variable die roll to the base starting age to get the character's starting age, and the possible lifespan of a character, assuming a quiet and peaceful life. Humans are also included on this list in case you want to determine their ages randomly. The maximum age for a character should be secretly determined and recorded by the DM. Player characters may have an idea of how long they expect to live, but do not know their true allotted lifespans. That's interesting. Kind of a neat little dynamic. Character might randomly die of old age when you don't know it's going to happen. And there's a little bit of realism in that. As a character ages, his ability scores are affected. Upon reaching 1/2 of his base maximum age, 45 for a human, the character loses 1 point of strength, or half of his exceptional strength rating, and 1 point of constitution, but gains 1 point of each intelligence and wisdom. At 2/3 of his base maximum age, 60 for a human, the character loses 2 more points of strength, or all his exceptional strength and 1 point more, 2 points of dexterity, and 1 more point of constitution, but he gains 1 point of wisdom. Upon reaching the base maximum age, the character loses 1 more point from each of strength, dexterity, and constitution, while gaining 1 more point in both intelligence and wisdom. All aging adjustments are cumulative. See Table 12 for a summary of these effects. Although many people have claimed to live to great ages, the oldest human of verifiable age was 113 years old in 1988 and is still alive as of the writing of this book. So Table 11, age, if you are going to determine age randomly, you have the races, dwarf, elf, gnome, half-elf, halfling, human, starting age with a base age, your variable die roll, and the maximum age, which is your base plus the variable. So for a dwarf, if you're going to roll their age randomly, the starting base age would be 40 years, and then you would add a 5d6 roll to that. So it'd be up for between 40 and 30, so 40 and 70 would be the average starting age. The dwarf maximum age would start with a base of 250, because that's how long the average dwarf would live, but then you would add 2d100. So he could live up to a maximum of 450 years, he or she. For an elf, starting age would be 100 for adventuring, and you would add a 5d6 to that. And then the maximum age range would be between 350 plus 4d100, so 350 to 750 years old, maximum age. The gnome character would start with a base age of 60, and you would add 3d12, so 60 to 96 would be the starting age, and maximum age range would be between 200 as the base and 3d100, so another 300, so 500 would be his maximum age, 200 to 500 years old. Half-Elf would start at base age 15 with a variable roll of 1d6, so 15 to 21 for a Half-Elf. And the maximum age range would be between 125 and 3d20, so 125 to 185 would be the max age range for a Half-Elf. Halfling would start at age 20 with a variable roll of 3d4, so 20 to 12, so 20 to 32 for a Halfling as their starting age, and the maximum age range for a Halfling would be starting at 100, and you add a d100, so 1 to 200 years of age for their max age. A human would start with a base age of 15, roll 1d4, so it's between 15 and 19 as a starting age, and their max age would be between 90 plus a 2d20, so 90 to 130 would be their max age for a human. Upon attaining the maximum age for an elf does not die. Rather, he feels compelled to migrate to some mysterious other land, departing the world of men. There may be times when a magical device or spell adds years to or subtracts years from a player character's life. This magical aging can have two different effects. Some magical aging physically affects the character. For example, a haste spell ages those it affects by 1 year. This aging is added directly to the player character's current age. He physically acquires the appearance of himself 1 year older, a few more wrinkles, etc. Characters who increase in age from magical effects do not gain the benefits of increased wisdom and intelligence. These are a function of the passage of game time, but the character does suffer the physical losses to strength, dexterity, and constitution associated with aging. These are breakdowns of the body's systems. Physical age can also be removed in the same manner. Some potions give years back to the character. In this case, the physical appearance of the character is restored. The character can regain lost vigor, strength, dexterity, and constitution as his body is renewed, but he does not lose any of the benefits of aging, such as wisdom and intelligence. Magical aging can also work to increase or decrease the lifespan of the character. In such a case, the actual age of the character is unaffected. All adjustments are made by the DM to the character's maximum age, which only the DM knows. For example, a human finds a magical fountain that bestows great longevity, 10 to 60 years or more. The DM has already determined the human will naturally live to 103 years, base 90 plus 2d20, in this case 13. 13 plus 90 is 103. The water of the fountain bestows 40 more years, so that unless the character meets a violent end, he will live to 143 years. He still suffers the effects of aging at the usual ages, 45, 60, and 90 years, respectively, but the period in which he would be considered a venerable elder of his people is extended for 40 years. There are a number of other personal characteristics your character has: hair and eye color, body shape, voice, noticeable features, and general personality. There are no tables for these things, nor should there be. Your job as a player is to add these details, thereby creating the type of character you want. You probably know some from the start. Do you want to play a towering, robust warrior or a slim, unassuming swordsman? Others, especially your character's personality, will grow and take form as you play. Remember, you are an actor, and your character is your role. So Table 12 shows the aging effects of each race. It shows when the race becomes middle-aged, old-aged, and then of a venerable age. And for each, middle age is half of the base maximum, old age is 2/3 of the base maximum age, and then venerable age is the base maximum age. So for a dwarf, that would be 125 years for middle-aged, 167 years for old-aged, and 250 years for venerable age. For an elf, it would be 175 years for middle-aged, 233 years for old-aged, and 350 years for venerable-aged. For a gnome, it would be 100 years for middle-aged, 133 years for old-aged, and 200 years for venerable-aged. For a half-elf, middle age would start at 62 years of age, old age would start at 83 years, venerable age would start at 125 years. For a halfling, middle age would start at 50 years, old age would start at 67 years, venerable age would start at 100 years. And for a human, middle age would start at 45 years, old age would start at 60 years, and venerable age would start at 90 years. And then when the character hits middle age, they suffer a -1 to strength and constitution abilities. They receive a +1 to intelligence and wisdom abilities. When they hit old age, they suffer a -2 to strength and dexterity, a -1 to constitution, and they receive a +1 to wisdom. And when characters hit venerable age, they receive a -1 to strength, dexterity, and constitution, and get a +1 to intelligence and wisdom. So that concludes Chapter 2 on races in the Player's Handbook. So in the next video, we will read the corresponding chapter in the Dungeon Master's Guide, Chapter 2 on player character races. Thank you for everybody who made it through the video. Please leave a comment on how I can improve these videos for you and keep you more engaged. And if there's anything you'd like answers for the rules that we read today, I'd be very happy to answer those for you in the comments. So leave your questions and keep on rolling those dice and creating characters to play in your next AD&D 2nd edition game.